Good afternoon. Quite challenging to get the after lunch session, so we'll try to do our best. Today we're here to try to talk about aerospace in Asia. And first, let me introduce our panelists. Naguib bin Mohd Nor from Strand Aerospace Malaysia.
Yep.
Chung Mak, Argosy International. So, Paul, please.
I'll just briefly introduce myself and my company. I'm from New York, but spent most of my life in Asia, and that's why they've asked me to attend this panel, even though I probably don't look that Chinese. I started my company in 1988, and we're really focused on exporting to both Taiwan and China, really supporting basically Boeing business, or in that time McDonnell Douglas subcontract work in Asia Pacific, specifically, as I mentioned, China and Taiwan. And then in the past 26 years, I've grown the company substantially to be a global company, really focused on composite material supply, again, mostly focused on the OEM subcontract work and kind of Asia-centric, but as Asia Pacific developed its own indigenous commercial air platforms and even some military platforms outside of China, we focused on supplying and speccing in composite materials for those applications. So fast forwarding today, we have a global company heavily engaged in Asian aerospace.
Thanks, Paul. Naguib, your turn.
Okay. So my name is Naguib bin Mohd Nor. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and the owner of Strand Aerospace Malaysia. It's an engineering services company, so we are mainly stress and design engineers. So we work for Airbus in Europe predominantly. So I started the company in 2006 after about 10 years in the United Kingdom serving the Airbus supply chain over there. I grew the company organically in Kuala Lumpur. Started as the first stress lead with 4 guys. I'm now 160 engineers, all Malaysian. And I'm part of the economic transformation program of the country to grow a new industry, which is the engineering services industry, to help propel the Malaysian aerospace industry to the next level, because most of what we do today is build-to-print manufacturing. Thank you.
And thank you. And I'm Chung Mak from the Seabury Group. My previous life was with the airlines and MRO, with Cathay Pacific as well as the HAECO Group. And I spent some time in Abu Dhabi working for Mubadala as well as Adat. So maybe we should just start. So Paul, the Chinese expert, as you can see. We always hear a lot about China having extremely ambitious strategy for aerospace. Can you just walk us through some histories and some potential challenges that you see or they see?
Sure. I think it's a pertinent question for today because, you know, everyone's, not everyone, but most people are highly focused on China and its ambitions, and also they're focused on opportunities to collaborate in China or business opportunities. And there's some geopolitical implications too that a lot of people in the defense world are focused on. But I think there's also been some chatter about, you know, is China going to discontinue the ARJ-21, or is China going to discontinue the C919, or what's the future for the MA-60? So I'll just try and quickly touch on some of those points. One is, if I think from the Western supplier base, because these programs have been delayed, that's where the chatter occurs. But like me living in China and heavily engaged with COMAC on a day-to-day basis, there's no sense of canceling these programs. These programs are national missions, and they will be delivered. And if you look at the history of Chinese aerospace, you know, if we look at it from a historical perspective, in the early 60s, after the Sino-Soviet split, the Chinese kind of had 2 choices. They could invest in rockets, or they could invest in airplanes. And so to get a bigger bang for their buck, they invested in rockets. And that's one reason why the space platforms are a little more advanced today than aerospace. But China's become a much wealthier nation in the past 30 years with the opening, and a lot of money has been invested into aerospace, so aerospace is on a path to catch up. And China's always, from the late 70s, had an ambitious aerospace program. So if we look at the Y-10, it was kind of the Chinese attempt to reverse engineer or duplicate kind of a 707. And then following on that, they had a collaboration both with McDonnell Douglas to produce the trunk liners, and had a collaboration looking at developing a 100-seat plane with the Germans, and sent a whole bunch of aerospace engineers to Germany for up to 8 months. And so through these kind of steps and mishaps, they've gained a lot of experience, and and to the Chinese credit, I think they're very good at analyzing where they've fallen short, and then adapting the plan to meet and ensure higher opportunity for success going forward. So we've seen with McDonnell Douglas, they were planning to build 100 trunk liners in China, and in Shanghai, and end up building, I think, 30. They failed because even though China is a state-controlled market economy, they didn't control their airlines, and their airlines decided that they prefer to go to Seattle or go to Toulouse and buy airplanes instead of buying them in Shanghai at that point of history. So today, if you look at where the Chinese aerospace programs are, I think they're very focused on, if you're like a basketball coach, first dominate your home court. They're kind of focused on that. So they have something that other nations can enjoy in terms of the size of their market. So with that in mind, they've had the ability to get the airlines to purchase airplanes from COMAC, and China needs $78 billion worth of airplanes in the next 20 years, according to Boeing, or I think Airbus and COMAC and AVIC all have plus or minus 2 shoe sizes, a similar focus on the market. So I think China's commitment to aerospace is evident. We all, being part of the aerospace community, we all know the reasons why China is committed. We heard today about why this country is committed to aerospace, and the economic implications of having a vibrant aerospace industry, whether it's manufacturing or even just airline-based, MRO-based. So, and the implications for technology and innovation are also critical. So as China aligns its national mission to move away from low-cost manufacturing into high value-added, aerospace is a natural focus for a nation with that mission. And we all know today China is no longer the low-cost manufacturing hub of the world. It's actually a medium cost and struggling with cost manufacturing nation.
So that is history, and what are we seeing today, and what do you think possible in the future? I mean, the ARJ21, the C91919, you said they're selling it primarily to the local Chinese customer. Do you see it ever get out of the country and seriously compete with Boeing, Airbus, or even Bombardier?
I think the Chinese are realistic. I think they realize they have substantial barriers to competing in the near term. But I think they're focused on, the Chinese have always focused on the long term, and they see this as a building block process. I think their biggest challenges is we heard from Boeing today in an earlier session about how they're very focused on innovation and developing the next technology. So, I think the barriers for the Chinese are, kind of the intersecting the future barrier, because they're coming, from a lower position in terms of technology capability, especially in commercial aircraft. So I think that's one of their biggest challenges. I think another challenge is the way they've set up their supply chain and their partnership with subcontracting all their aerostructures domestically. I don't think they're leveraging global resources, which in today's and yesterday's sessions we heard that a lot of the global aerospace players are very focused on leveraging the world and the technology available in the world and collaborating in that. So even though COMAC for their platforms has subcontracted all the systems and the engines to global world-class suppliers, I think they haven't truly leveraged the global supply chain, and that I think will be an inhibitor to some degree, both to innovation and also to developing a product that will strongly compete against Boeing or Airbus. But speaking out of both sides of my mouth, the Chinese built nuclear weapons during the Cultural Revolution, so I wouldn't bet against them.
Thank you. What about engines, components, landing gears? I mean, we talk about a lot of airframes, but we haven't heard a lot of serious high-tech components coming out of China. They supply their own for their own aircraft, the MA60, but what about for the ARJ as well as the C909, import components?
Well,
Do you
MA60
see any of that going forward?
Well, I'm an aerostructures, I'm a composite material guy, so we do have composite materials in engines, but I'm not an expert on engines. The MA60 engines are Pratt & Whitney Canada engines, so those are imported. Engine technology is also seen as a critical technology for China. China has established a joint venture between AVIC and GE to develop indigenous engines for, I think, future variants of COMAC aircraft. Right now, if we look at kind of engine technology and where Boeing and Airbus are with their next single-aisle aircraft, the NEO, and the MAX, their greatest bump up in efficiencies and improvements in performance are kind of engine related. So again, this is going to be challenging for China because even with the joint venture, they're going to really need, if they're going to compete on the single aisle or even twin aisle, they're going to really need a strong engine. And if they develop that indigenously, they have a pretty steep learning curve, but they could also go the route of Boeing or Airbus and partner and buy, procure the most advanced engines globally, whether for Rolls or GE or Pratt.
Okay, thanks. Well, let me take a break after your lunch. We'll
Thank
go to
you.
Malaysia now. Naguib,
Yes.
can you share with us what do you see as the landscape for aerospace in Southeast Asia, in particular Malaysia, your home country, and what are the challenges and what are the Malaysian government doing, and the rest of the Southeast Asian country governments are doing in aerospace?
Okay. Let me comment. Let's focus on Malaysia in the first instance. The Malaysian government has been focused on developing aerospace since 1998 when it launched the Malaysian Aerospace Blueprint. That blueprint is something which I've seen in many parts copied around the Southeast Asian region. So I think we've been a leader in aerospace, I think, in the region. Obviously, with Indonesia at some point having quite a stride forward, but then having a big setback. So from the launch of the blueprint, it was very clear that aero manufacturing would be on the cards. We dabbled quite a bit in light aircraft. We worked on buying aircraft designs and companies, two-seater, four-seater type aircraft, but that didn't quite work out because the market wasn't strong enough. But what did happen, though, was that we became quite an integral part to the Airbus supply chain, and Boeing as well to a smaller degree. Most of the work at the start was due to offset. We bought certain aircraft which entitled us to certain manufacturing contracts, and that's where we established the base. Yeah. In parallel to that, now I was never part of that story of Malaysia. I was part of Malaysia's education story, right? And Malaysia today sponsors, I think, probably 5,000-6,000 students every year to study abroad. We produce something like 22,000 engineers every year. Probably 2/3 of those are mechanical engineers. And we don't have jobs for these kind of qualifications, but we sponsor these guys to study these things, right? Now, I was one of the guys. I studied in Manchester University, did my degree in aerospace. I then did a master's in aircraft design at Cranfield University, then worked in the Airbus supply chain in the UK. When we saw Airbus was pushing for Power 8 and asking for more and more outsourcing to low-cost regions, I took the opportunity to set up Strand Aerospace in Malaysia, and that's how we got started. Now, it was quite opportune because by that time, I think Composite Technology Research Malaysia, which is the government-owned manufacturing company which manufactured components predominantly, was quite well established. It had attempted developing engineering capability in-house, but what I've seen is that generally that becomes a big challenge to try and keep engineers in a low-cost manufacturing environment. So a lot of those engineers left. They began to populate Airbus in the UK again, and South Africa, and then in Boeing as well. And there was a need for someone to develop pure engineering capabilities, right? And so we'd come in right at the right time, and within 3 years we'd grown organically to a certain number. But the kind of work we'd been doing in Malaysia has been focused on. We started on the A380 rear classification, so we did from Rib 11 to 49, which is quite substantial. And I did that with a bunch of for Malaysian engineers who previous to that had never done work like that before. The good thing about the Malaysians is that they're very keen, and obviously they're hungry for it. So in a very short space of time, we'd done more and more work for Airbus. Today we do work for almost every variant of Airbus aircraft. 320neo, we're doing bits of the Sharklet, 350 fuselage, landing gear components, 380 spars, as I mentioned, and some skin components as well. 400M bits which are not manufactured in Malaysia, the trailing edge. So we do the work in Malaysia for GKN. So the government saw this as an opportunity. In 2010, there was a strong push to transform the economy into a service economy. And that move was then entitled the Economic Transformation Program, which I mentioned at my introduction. This Economic Transformation Program's goal is to develop high-value jobs in spaces where Malaysia has the best advantage. And what dropped out of that, it was quite an interesting exercise. The government got 500 people from industry all over Malaysia, mostly C-level people, locked them up in 12 rooms, gave them all a label, each one a different economic area, and told them to write the transformation program for the country. So after 2 months, there was documents that came out for 12 economic areas, and under business services, oddly enough, came aerospace, right? And the two focus areas was engineering services, as in design and analysis and those kind of services, and engineering and maintenance, as in the MRO industry, right? Malaysia identified that there were gaps, although there were strong capabilities today, there were gaps in the MRO capabilities, and in engineering services, there was basically a big hole, right? So fast forward 3 years from 2010 now, there is much greater synergy between engineering, the kind of work that my company does. So we are by default the biggest engineering services company in the country dealing in aerospace. We are beginning to see the value of that for the manufacturing industry. Yeah? For the MRO industry, that's been a little bit more of a struggle, but the silver lining has been the setting up of Airbus Malaysia. That happened February this year. Airbus Malaysia is responsible for Asia, all the in-service issues for Asia. Very quickly, Airbus was able to partner with the government in human capital development on a large scale. And because Malaysia has been very active in sponsoring human capital development, as I've mentioned before, this was something that worked very well for Airbus, and they can see a long-term view. So I think going forward, the strategy really is to be, in the first instance, a hub for the OEMs in Southeast Asia, to be complementary to the Middle Eastern markets, yeah. And then to look at rejuvenating, I think, the aerospace economy, starting with Malaysia, getting ourselves into design and build again. We did some of that before. Spirit is doing that today. So sorry, we've got Spirit Aerospace Aerosystems as well in Kuala Lumpur now doing large sub-assemblies, right? But then looking at perhaps synergizing with the other aerospace markets, developing. I see Vietnam is doing work now on the for Boeing through Mitsubishi, and Indonesia is doing quite a lot of metallics work for Airbus and Boeing.
Okay, thank you. Now, you mentioned one number just now, it perked up my ears. You mentioned Malaysia trained 22,000 engineers a year.
A year.
Where do they go to work?
McDonald's.
Why?
Right.
I mean, there's an engineer shortage around the world. But
there is. So here's the problem, I think. And I think it's generally in Asia. You've got highly educated workforce, but what the industry needs is industry-ready workforce. And that's two different things completely, yeah? I hear often complaints from my French clients, for example, that they don't understand the English when they're speaking with people from Asia, right? Which is quite interesting coming from a French person, but that's the scenario, right? That's a scenario that's actually happening. So So we're producing all these people, and most of them are going into the consumer services industry, you know, so they're going into retail, they're going into financial services, IT, and so on and so forth. So it's quite a big wasted resource. Having said that, the Malaysian government has not really pared down its efforts in just sponsoring people. It
So
has
still producing 22
still producing. The organization that I'm tied up with, so I'm partly bought by the government of Malaysia at the moment, 30%. This organization alone has got 47 pre-university colleges, 26 vocational colleges, its own aerospace university, and it sponsors probably 2,000 people a year to study engineering in France, Germany, UK, Russia, and Japan. Right? So there's a lot of untapped resource in Malaysia. Every time I put out a job ad, I get maybe 500,000 CVs, you know, and I'm hiring at the rate of about 10 engineers a month, and that's the best that we can get. And they all speak many languages. Obviously, they speak all the Asianic languages, but now the big plus is that they speak Russian, German, French, and English as well. So I think it's an opportunity for whoever it is that wants to expand on human capital requirements to base themselves in Malaysia. It's a good hub because of the characteristics of the Malaysian people, if I can say that. They are highly transportable. So when I have my Malaysian engineers, a funny characteristic of them is that when I send them to Germany, for example, after a week or so, they start speaking English with a slight German accent, right? It's a funny thing, but the thing is that in Malaysia itself, we tend to do that with the other races as well, and it's a means of accommodating a relationship. So because of that, we found that our clients have become very, very comfortable very quickly with our Malaysian engineers, and the trust starts to form very quickly as well. So I think this is an advantage of Malaysia, but you're right, it's not being capitalized on by the global industry very much at the moment.
I mean, that's an amazing number, 22,000. I just never heard of that before, but thank you. And I just checked, it says Asian focus, so we're going to talk about Asia besides China and Malaysia. So what else can we talk about, Paul, in terms of Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and other countries in Asia in terms of aerospace development that you're aware of or you have some experience with?
Well, I think, you know, the development in aerospace across Asia varies from region to region. I'll start off with Southeast Asia, even though I've been told to leave Malaysia alone because we've discussed it for a while. You know, being a CEO, I don't have to listen to anyone. So, you know, I think what we've seen in Southeast Asia and what we've seen in Malaysia is the rapid development, especially in composites. We have two major composite suppliers, one being ACM in northern Malaysia near the Thai border, being more Boeing-centric, and the other CTRM, which is ACM is a joint venture, a Boeing joint venture. CTRM was historically a government company, and now
it still is.
But
well,
it's
owned by
changed
a
ownership.
government-linked company, yeah.
But CTRM basically was established by the Malaysian government with support from Airbus. Airbus wanted to sell A380s to Malaysia, and in return they agreed to help Malaysia establish composite manufacturing parts. So I think for, you know, kind of, you know, Southeast Asia started to develop a hub in composite manufacturing where there's still, especially composite manufacturing that's not very high-tech and has more touch labor in it. And we're seeing Thailand in the last 2 or 3 years start to get aggressive, and some companies there doing interesting work. Some of them are multinationals that have set up in Thailand. Some of them are indigenous companies that have grown up. Vietnam I personally am pretty bullish on Vietnam. There's some Japanese companies that have set up, and I think Vietnam is going to be the next big, you know, hand-touch aerospace manufacturing center. So that's kind of a percolating area. Then if we, you know, China, because of its manufacturing infrastructure and its criticality as a market, you know, from the late 80s to now has been heavily engaged in aerospace supply chain. Japan, of course, we know is probably the most advanced in terms of the global supply chain and producing substantial components like, or serious assemblies like, you know, wings for Boeing aircraft, and also has the ability to produce its own aircraft, and it has a, you know, the MRJ 20, what is it, MRJ?
Just the MRJ.
Yeah, MRJ program. Korea, I think it's kind of interesting because it's sort of...
And its MRO capabilities and its ambitions around its industry. How far along is Asia compared with Abu Dhabi, or how does Abu Dhabi compare? It's a bit of a sensitive question, given
Of course, a member of the press will only ask a sensitive
but
question.
given our location. But this is an off-the-record question. This is just a question to you guys. This is.
I'll defer to you because you spent more time here, but then I'll chip in my 2 cents.
The moderator is not supposed to answer questions, but yeah, I think you mentioned 2 companies in Abu Dhabi, Strata and Adat, right? I think from the point of Strata, my understanding is the UAE government as well as Mubadala has spent a lot of time and working with the OEM and try to in a very, very short time, going from absolutely nothing until producing pretty serious, and now they're tier one supplier for both Airbus and Boeing. So I think in most Asian countries, it doesn't have that luxury of the government supporting them and going forward that quickly. And I think that, in my opinion, it's better than CTRM, and it's better than anything that we have seen in Asian country, even include the Japanese, because if you look at the Japanese, they actually spent a very, very long time building that industry, but if you compare to what Strata have done here, it's simply amazing. So, and then that's Strata. On Adat, on the MRO front, I don't know, as the past chief strategy officer for Adat, it is also an ambition for Mubadala as well as the UAE government to stake a position in the world as a premium maintenance service provider. But we do have challenges in the UAE because we do not have a very large group of indigenous workforce. Until recently, you heard from Ray Gamble yesterday, we are now start training engineers, mechanics to do that kind of work, but we didn't before. So the cost is quite high, and from an MO point of view, I think the work is here, the quality is here because the region, there's a lot of demand in the region, but in terms of attracting business from outside the region, it's challenging. And in that front, I think Asia is ahead. So that's my view.
I think I'd just like to just add to that a little bit, yeah. I went to Strata in December, and interestingly, as I walked the floor, I could speak Malay to most of the people that were working there, right? So I think a whole line of engineers from CTRM had been transplanted from Kuala Lumpur, Malacca, south of Malaysia, to Abu Dhabi, yeah. And I don't see that necessarily as an issue. I mean, you see that Malaysians, I mean, I was training MROC engineers, I think, in December as well. And when they turned up, you know, there were Filipinos and Malaysians, and there was one Emirati, you know, in the whole group, right? I saw that as an opportunity, really, because as Mr. Chung quite rightly said, the support here is second to none, and I can say the Malaysian government does its best, but we just don't have the kind of push that they have over here. If it can be realized, this human capital transfer, if you like, as something as a regional strategy, it'll work a lot better for both these industries, you know, because like I said, 22,000 engineers, where are they going? Yeah. If I can plan for the requirement here, as well as what I need back home, you know, I've got more than enough people to feed both sides. And and they're going to drive towards more and more automation over here, for example, in Strata. As they do that, there's still going to be labor-intensive work that maybe they won't want to do here anymore in the next few years. And that will have to go out again, perhaps to Vietnam or wherever it is, right? So I think we're missing something here in how we're looking at the industry. It's very siloed, and it should not be like that, I think, for everybody's benefit.
Thank you. Another question?
No, let me.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. I'll try and make a few comments on. I think, you know, Strata is a world-class company, and I'm not saying that to be politically correct. It truly is. And they have, just as Naguib stated, they have a global workforce that's very strong. But as he also noted, it is a silo. I think to the UAE's credit, they've recognized that this is a silo, but it's a start of a footprint. So they're very focused on building an integrated aerospace supply. And this is just one piece of a puzzle. So as a standalone silo, I think it'll struggle. They can generate the business because they're buying enough airplanes and they can leverage their aircraft purchases to get a lot of work. That's not a problem. But to really be, as the Boeing people were saying, to really have a business case, they really need to build up local suppliers that are doing additional value-added work. And they understand that and they're focused on it. So I think they'll be successful.
Okay, can we just take one last question, because we're really running out of time. One last question, if there's... Please.
I'm a guy that chases facilities, and we see some action in the Philippines. Could you comment on what's going on in the Philippines?
Do you know?
Sorry, which sort of activity you were talking
Yeah,
about?
we see some Clark Air Force Base, Boeing, Singapore Airlines moving into that market. And what you mentioned earlier that you've got Thailand as a possible growth market, and the same thing with Vietnam. Do you see Philippines the same way?
I think it's been mainly in MRO, if I'm not mistaken, I think in the Philippines. I've not seen any manufacturing apart from components for avionics systems. Moog, I think, has got a manufacturing out there.
Well, B Aero has a facility in the Philippines. It's growing pretty rapidly. I think, the Clark Air Force Base, in terms of converting it into a manufacturing base, you have world-class infrastructure. I'm not sure why the Philippines isn't more successful in this area, but it might go back to government strategy and aligning industry and government. And they also suffer from not being a large aircraft buyer. So, they don't have that ability to leverage their airline to get some startup work. But, if you look at what they have, I don't see why they're not more successful.
Thank you, and thanks very much. And I'm sure the gentleman wouldn't mind you try to catch them outside the room if you want more questions. Thank you very much for your time, and have a nice day.